Now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Chuck Peterson. As I mentioned before, Chuck is an emeritus professor of zoology at Idaho State University. He is also the affiliate curator of herpetology for the Idaho Museum of Natural History. Currently, he teaches herpetology and nature photography. His research interests include the spatial, physiological, and conservation ecology of both amphibians and reptiles. He is currently working on community science projects utilizing iNaturalist mobile application to document the distribution and activity of amphibians and reptiles in Idaho and the greater Yellowstone area. He is a passionate photographer, and he uses place-based photography to further public understanding of amphibians and reptiles. And before I ask you to welcome him, I'll just let you know that I'm wearing two hats tonight. Our AV person is home with a very ill husband, so I'm not only your host, but I'm also the AV person. So it's going to take me a little bit of time to get back there and get the cameras set up, and I appreciate your patience. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Chuck Peterson.
Well, thank you for the nice introduction. And I'm pleased to see so many people here. This is great. I love talking about especially snakes, so this is fun for me. Last summer, I got an email from Kristen asking if I would be interested in giving a program here, and I said that, well, I have this Snakes of Idaho exhibit. We developed it about 6 years ago, and it's been touring around. It's part of the traveling exhibit program for the Idaho Museum of Natural History, and it's been traveling around the state now for about 6 years. And I asked Kristen, how about if I give a talk in conjunction with putting up that exhibit? And it turns out that the exhibit, since it's all the species, takes up about twice the size of what's available here near Mallory Row. So we broke it down to the 8 species, the 8 of the 12 species in Idaho that occur in Blaine County. So it's a simplified exhibit, but that'll be over in the library now. And then this is a talk that's kind of a combination of showing you some of those pictures, telling you a little bit about how I took the pictures, and then mostly I'm hoping that at the end of this talk you'd be able to identify the adult of any adult snake that you saw in the state, or well, in Blaine County. We're not going to do the whole state. And then I'll show you some maps and pictures of habitat, so you'll know what kinds of places they occur, and then just a few highlights of natural history, of what temperatures are they active at, what do they feed on, how they defend themselves, what eats them, how they reproduce, things like that, and a little bit about conservation. So that's, in fact, I should have changed here's the outline for the talk. So, and I have a rattlesnake with me, a live rattlesnake, and you can come up and look at that afterwards. And if people are interested, I can safely tube. I don't know if any of you ever seen this with a tube of rattlesnake. You slide the tube over the snake's head, and then you grab it like that. And then people can come up and touch the snake or feel the rattle safely. So if anybody wants me to do that, I practiced it before, so we can. I know this snake, at least before you came here, it worked. But I have found that having a live animal, I get a lot better response with that. And if people can physically touch it, it's very different than just looking at it through an aquarium. So we'll do that at the end if people are interested in the snake as cooperative enough to go in the tube. Sometimes it's not. So I'm going to I can save this as a PDF and I can share it with you, so you don't really feel the need to write down everything. You know, I can give you that. Okay. So this talk that I'm giving you is not just information that I've looked up in books, okay, or looked at YouTube videos and things. This is, much of this is based on the research that has been done in my lab or that has been done with my colleagues. And I should say that my experience directly in Blaine County is pretty limited, but what I will be telling you is largely based on, oh gosh, 40 years of experience studying snakes in Idaho. And this work has been funded, to my surprise, by a wide variety of organizations in the 30 years that I've been at, 35 years now that I've been at ISU. And those sources of funding have included like the Bureau of Land Management, the Department of Energy was really important, Idaho National Guard, the Army actually, or the Department of Defense is one of the major supporters of herpetological research, and they probably control the land where more endangered herp species are located than anywhere else in the country. They have an entire group of, the USGS and the Department of Defense have more PhD herpetologists than probably any other organizations in the world. Idaho Fish and Game, Idaho Power has been very important for funding our work. National Park Service, we've had, I think there have been a couple of National Geographic grants. Of course, Idaho State University has helped in a lot of ways, as has the University of Idaho. And NSF, Forest Service, USGS, there's really been a lot. And then my last master's student, Stan Giltz, did a lot of his master's thesis was on using iNaturalist as a way, and he was the one that basically set up our iNaturalist herpetology project for Idaho. And even now, 5 years after he's finished, I still twist his arm to make maps and things for me. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about the photographs. I've been interested in photography almost as long as I've been interested in amphibians and reptiles. Most of the pictures that are in our exhibit were taken in the field in Idaho. There are a few that we got better pictures from somewhere outside of the state, and then also a few that we had to take in captivity. But most of them were in the field, and these pictures were taken over a 45-year period, starting in the 1970s when I was in graduate school. And over that time, I've used a really wide variety of cameras, starting out with an old single-lens reflex film camera, and I probably used that camera like for 30 years. I used that more than any other camera. And then there was kind of the transition where as soon as I could get into digital photography and not have to deal with film, I did that. And actually some of the pictures in this exhibit were actually taken with a 3-megapixel camera, if you can believe that. And then for a long time, for, over 10 years, I used digital single-lens reflex cameras. And then for about the last 8 years, I've shifted over to using mirrorless cameras. But the cameras and now the software have made getting good photographs so much easier than it used to be. The most common lens I use now is a super zoom telephoto that focuses fairly closely. I've also used macro lenses too. I use flash occasionally, but most of the time I try to use natural light. And for snakes, I found, I went back and looked at these pictures and remembered how I had taken them. Most of them somebody was helping. You know, I'd say most wildlife pictures, you know, you can photograph them and you don't have to interact with them. But with snakes, they just crawl away and get away, or they're not in a very appropriate pose. So often it really helps if you have a wrangler there, a snake wrangler to help you. Up until, what was it, about 1997, actually around 2000, my pictures were all on film, and so those had to be, the slides had to be scanned in. And since then it's been digital. And then I use Lightroom to process my pictures. I'm kind of intermediate. I'm not a purist that tries to do everything in camera, but I also don't spend my life in Photoshop. And then the images have been printed on aluminum with a matte finish, and I use a lab in Iowa called Kennel Crow. And they've been really, really helpful. The really nice thing about that is that you don't have to have frames to put them up, which really cuts the cost of getting prints to hang. Okay, so in Idaho we have 12 species of snakes in 3 different families. Believe it or not, we have a true boa constrictor that lives throughout Idaho. It's called the rubber boa. It gets about 2.5 feet long, and you have them right here in this county. And then we have 2 species of rattlesnakes in the state. The prairie rattlesnake that's in the upper salmon drainage, and then in southern Idaho and west central Idaho we have western rattlesnakes, and then the rest of those are what we call, they're in the family Colubridae. Those are often called harmless snakes, but those include things like racers, whip snakes, garter snakes, and there's a number of other night snakes, and and the garter snakes. Those are the ones that we have here in Blaine County. There are things that, well, the prairie rattlesnake doesn't occur here. The brown snakes, the long-nosed snakes, and the ringneck snakes, there aren't observations of those. Now there's 2 main areas where most of the research on snakes in Idaho is taking place. The Idaho National Laboratory has research that goes back into the 1970s and then continues into around 2008, 2010. So there. And that was largely funded by the Department of Energy in running the Idaho National Laboratory site, and also from Wildlife Conservation Society. And we had a grant from the Idaho State Board of Education that was really important for our work there. And I had probably, there were over 10 students that did their master's or PhD thesis on the snakes out there, mostly on the rattlesnakes. This is a great place to study snakes because it's about 900 square miles of protected area. And it's probably the least disturbed sagebrush steppe habitat in the state. Although even that, they're having big fires and things like that too now. So it's become quite a bit more disturbed than it was with fire and invasive species since I started working out there. But a lot of the work that I'll be telling you about is based on our study of snakes there. We had a 17-year study of population monitoring. We marked thousands of snakes out there over that time period. The other area that's received a great deal of research, and it's still ongoing, is the Morley-Nelson Snake River Birds of Prey area, and that is located here. If you look at this map on the left side here, well, there it's the southwest Idaho, and then boy, I can't see it from here, but on my computer screen it looks great. This is it's about 55 miles long, I think, along the Snake River Canyon. It was established in the 1970s to protect raptor populations. That's the highest density of nesting raptors in North America. At least it used to be. And our funding for the work there has come through the Bureau of Land Management, Idaho Power, Idaho National Guard, and the U.S. Geological Survey. One of my former graduate students, David Pilliard, works as an ecologist for USGS. He works with the Army National Guard now, continuing. It's been 25 years now of studying and monitoring reptile populations out there. The pioneer in those studies was Lowell Diller. He did his PhD thesis from the University of Idaho down there in the 1970s when they were establishing the birds of prey area. And he did all the baseline inventory work and then also focused on the interactions, the potential competitive interactions between gopher snakes and rattlesnakes and raptors. And he passed away a few years ago, but I really dedicate the exhibit to him because he had a huge effect on our knowledge of snakes in the state. Gotta hit the right button. All right, so, and then this is this is actually a statewide project, but it's actually the most important news source of information on the distribution and activity of amphibians and reptiles in Idaho. Now, how many people here are familiar with the iNaturalist application and program? So actually not that many. Okay, this is good opportunity then. iNaturalist is an app, and you can download it to your smartphone, either Android or iPhone. And it makes, you can take a photograph, run the app, you can take a photograph of an animal or a plant or a lichen or a mushroom or whatever that you see. It will date and timestamp it. It gets the GPS coordinates, and then if you have, or you can either hold it, or when you get back to a network, you can upload it, and it goes to a database down in San Francisco. Used to be with the California Academy of Science, and now they're their own, and National Geographic was a big supporter of iNaturalist. They were sponsored for it. It's one of the largest community science projects in the world. I think they have over 3 million observers now, and they have, I think, a couple 100 million observations. And it covers all species. So it's really, but we started in 2016. One of the neat things you can do is you can create your own projects within iNaturalist. So we wanted to get data for doing distribution modeling. And we Dan Giltz and I created the Idaho Amphibian and Reptile Naturalist Project. I think there were less than 50 observations in the state for amphibians and reptiles then. And I dedicated the year of my sabbatical to working on that project. We brought people from iNaturalist to Idaho to teach. I think I gave 35 talks around the state. And now it's taken off much greater than we thought. We've had almost 3,000 people contribute to this project, or their observations end up in our project. And we have over 13,000 observations. This is, particularly for snakes, this is the largest source of georeferenced locations that exists, more than the museums, more than all the independent research, the agency research done. So this is really something that demonstrates the power of community science and individual citizens getting out there and gathering information. The one thing I would caution people, if you do find like rattlesnakes or say snake dens, you obscure your coordinates so people don't. There are people that will go out there and just kill them to kill them, and so there's a kind of a dark side to having the public involved in this, is that it can be used to the animal's detriment. So if you're doing that, we suggest that the ones I do it for are for the rattlesnakes, and if I have a snake den, those seem to be only. The rare snakes are so rare that you can give somebody the coordinates and they're not going to find them. We can't find them. It's really hard. Dan made up this map for me, I think a couple of days ago. That shows now we have about 5,000 snake observations for Idaho from iNaturalist, and then I had put the outline of Blaine County on there so that you can see that. That is mostly garter snakes. Terrestrial garter snakes are the most common. Rubber boas and racers are the ones that you see the most. But there's gopher snakes and some rattlesnakes too. And there's a couple other species as well. Yeah, so here's what it is. So northern rubber boas, we've got 12 of those observations. Racers, 7 of those. Oh, I should say too that basically the garter snakes and the rubber boas are the most cold colony. We've got observations of rubber boas in Yellowstone National Park from over 10,000 feet. And in the Beartooth Mountains, we have observations of terrestrial garter snakes over 10,000 feet. So they can't get quite high. I think I've got garter snake observations from over 9,000 feet in Frank Church, but nothing. I don't think I have anything over 10,000 feet. Striped whip snakes, they are in the state's database, so they have been reported, but there aren't any that show up in iNaturalist. There's no records of ringneck snakes for the county, but it's a rare species, and I think it's possible that it still occurs here. So I'll mention it when I talk about the individual species. Desert night snakes are known to occur, but again, don't show up in iNaturalist. Gopher snakes would be the second most common snake that you have here, and 43 observations that are known. Long-nosed snakes and ground snakes just don't occur here. They just occur down around the Snake River. Terrestrial garter snakes, that's the most common one, with 68. Common garter snakes, there's 3 records of them, I think 3 from the county, but none have shown up in iNaturalist. I didn't look and check, but common garter snakes have declined in I think southeastern Idaho at least, with the widespread disappearance of leopard frogs, which is one of their biggest prey items. Western rattlesnakes, 17 observations. The rattlesnakes and the gopher snakes, things like that, you're going to find those more to the southern side of the country, where it's warmer and drier. Okay, and then there's the some pictures of what those different ones look like. But 8 of those we know there have been records for Blaine County, which was a surprise to me. You've got about 2/3 of it. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is go through, go through species by species and try to hit the high points. But the first thing I'm going to do is explain to you how, if you see one of these snakes, how you could identify it. So here's a rubber boa. Rubber boas are pretty stout-bodied snakes, and they get, oh, I'd say most of them are going to be less than 2 feet. They're sexually dimorphic, so the males are much smaller than the females. The really big ones are females. But they can get up to 2.5 feet in length. They have a solid color. They're usually kind of a dark brown or kind of a tan color, and then they're usually kind of yellowish, pale yellow on the belly. The ones over in Hell's Canyon, though, there's some with bright orange colors. And there's a population in Oregon where there's some mutation and they're lilac color. They have a blunt tail, and I'll talk more about that a little bit later. And then they have kind of a wedge-shaped head. They're a burrowing snake. They spend most of their time underground. They're also nocturnal. And they have smooth scales. Often you find burrowing animals, they have very smooth scales. Makes it easier, I think, for them to burrow through the soil. And then one of the most fascinating things about rubber boas, again, these are a true boa constrictor. They're constrictor. In the males, this is another sexually dimorphic character. You can see what are called the anal spurs, and those are the remnants. One of them is a remnant of the thigh bone. You know, snakes evolve from lizards. And so what you're looking at there is the vestigial thigh that's in the snake, and they have a little bit of the pelvis too. And then there's a nerve plexus that actually innervates that. It's not used for locomotion anymore, but the males use it to stimulate the females during courtship. They're found pretty much throughout the whole state, but they're not in real dry areas. So like out on the INL, you don't find any rubber boas out there. But if you go on a big southern butte, which gets high and has some trees and things on it, then you'll find them up there. You go out in the southwest desert, you won't find rubber boas. It's like in the birds of prey area, you're not going to find rubber boas there. This is a great rubber boa place, though. This is at the Taylor Ranch Wilderness Research Station on Big Creek in Frank Church Wilderness area. We studied snakes there for a number of years, and some of the pictures of the rubber boas that you see are from that area. I created these maps with, this is from the iNaturalist showing you for the county. Can anybody see the red dots there at all? I can't from this angle. They show up good on the computer, but I guess if you want to see where these observations are, go to iNaturalist and query rubber boa Blaine County. You'll be able to see where they are. Okay, so here's some of the real interesting things. They're a burrowing snake. One of my PhD students studied them using little miniature radio transmitters that he surgically implanted in them. And he found that the adults came out on average about once, a little bit more often than once a week above ground. And they're mostly nocturnal or crepuscular, dawn, dusk, unless it's really cool, and then they may come out during the day. But look at this. This was someone wrote, sent me this. That's a glove. That's a rubber boa crawling in the snow in March down in Bear Lake County. I just thought that's good. My student said that he saw, he watched a rubber boa one night. I think he watched it for 6 hours, and he said that it moved about 4 feet. And it was really cold. It was in the 40s that he was able to get that, which is about, the garter snakes maybe go at those real cold temperatures too. These guys are primarily active from like March through November, depending on the elevation. Now here's another really interesting thing. You know, snakes are ectothermic animals. Their body temperatures are determined by the thermal gradients that are in their environment. They don't have high metabolic rates, so if it's cool, like at night or in the wintertime, their body temperature is going to be cold too. In fact, if they freeze, they'll die. So they have to basically go down below the frost line in order to survive. So that means they can only be active, you know, part of the year. Much of the year they're in hibernation. Their energy, the big advantage to being ectothermic is that your energy requirements can be very low. 1/10 to 1/50th of the amount of food a snake requires to a comparable sized endothermic animal like a mammal or a bird. So my student found a rubber boa out at Pex Creek Wildlife Management Area. He was doing a study in the lab and he needed a colony of live snakes. He brought the snake back, and a lot of times rubber boas just won't eat for a while. They're kind of picky. They like wild mice. They're not as happy with lab mice. And so it may take them a few months usually to get used to that and to start eating. Well, he had this snake for 23 months, and it didn't eat. And then after almost 2 years, it started eating on its own. And it was in pretty good shape. I mean, it had lost about 15% of its body weight in almost 2 years of not eating. So their fasting endurance is remarkable. It's probably not uncommon, like for droughts, for snakes like gopher snakes or rattlesnakes to sometimes have to skip a year and not eat. These guys are constrictors, and any of you that have had, I used to have a rubber boa that I use, and it's the best animal for outreach education because they're just so friendly and calm and never bite when you coil around their hand. They're just a wonderful animal. They're kind of the teddy bear of the snake world. And but when they are feeding, they're killers. I mean, you see them go after a mouse and they hit it right away and they wrap all around it and they constrict it. You know, when a snake constricts, it's not really crushing the prey. It holds the ribs in, particularly for warm-blooded prey, and they can't breathe. Because in order for you to breathe, you have to be able to expand your chest, right? And then you can create negative pressure and bring in oxygen. Well, if somebody is holding your chest closed, constricting, you can't. And then what apparently also happens is that they will that they can constrict so much that it basically cuts off the blood flow to the brain. And even if the animal didn't suffocate, it would die that way. And boa constrictors, I'm not sure if I don't know if this has been studied in rubber boas, but in boa constrictors, they actually monitor the heart rate. And they don't release their coil until they feel the heart stop. Oh, sure. Does that sound a little better? Okay. Here, look at this picture. I don't know how well you can see it, but what's unusual about that picture? Can anybody tell me? Pardon? Well, yeah, it's a light color. That's from California. What else? Yeah. No, that's an adult. Back here? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear what you said. No. That's its head. That's its tail. The tail, the vertebrae on the tip of the tail are all fused, and they form a cone of bone like that. They hide the head away from a predator, and then they strike with their tail. And then they have musk glands right here that release a really unpleasant musk. And my student accidentally got some of it in his eye, and he said it really burns. So that's one of the ways that they can kind of defend themselves. These are live bearers. What you find is these snakes, like the garter snakes, the snakes that occur at real high elevations, they're live bearing. Okay, they don't lay eggs. They hold the eggs in the body, and then the young are born. And that's an adaptation to cool temperatures. And here's another really interesting fact about these guys. They can live for over 50 years. Yeah, that first rubber boa that I collected, I kept him personally. It was a full-grown adult, and I kept it for over 25 years. And I've heard of people keeping them for over 50 years in captivity. They can be hard to find, but they're actually probably common. My student had a very hard time getting rubber boas initially, and then we finally found a rubber boa. We put a radio transmitter in it, tracked it back to the den, and he eventually caught 80 rubber boas at that den. And he estimated that the population was like around 150. And he never found one. He put radio transmitters in them and tracked them. He never found one that went more than a kilometer away from the den. They really stayed close. Okay, here's another really interesting thing. This is a raven right here, lower right, and that raven is eating a young rubber boa. Okay, this was a graduate student at U of I who was studying moose, and he saw this and got a whole set of photographs. The earlier picture that he has, I should have put that one in here, the rubber boa is wrapped all around the raven's neck, and the raven can't get it off. And the raven's mother, I think this was its mother, came over and held it. Birds are probably the major predator for snakes in general. Okay, our second species is the North American racer, or most people just call them racers. These are found all across the country, and they have a lot of different color variants. The one that we have here is usually kind of a greenish gray color. And they can get pretty good size. They can get about 4 feet or so long. They don't have any pattern, and they have smooth scales, so they have a pointed tail, and they have big eyes. They're a diurnal snake that's very daytime active. They're out actively foraging. And a real interesting thing is that their young don't look like the adults. The young, you can see here in the upper right-hand corner, they have blotches. And it tends that blotch snakes tend to freeze as their defensive behavior. Snakes that have stripes or snakes that are a solid color, they will tend to try to escape and try to flee. And one of the students in the lab where I did my postdoc studied that in a population of garter snakes, and he found that actually the behavior is correlated with the appearance of the snake, and that is actually genetically based. This is a bad map for racers. Racers don't get up to too high elevations. So I like to use another map that we created that gives you a more restricted range for them. I tend to find them more in open areas, grasslands, although with all of the invasive grasses we have now, I think racers are one of the species that are probably getting more widespread, like the birds of prey area. This is from the top of Chinese Peak on the east side of Pocatello, looking to the southeast. That's the Port-de-Franche there. But you can find racers all throughout that area. That's nice racer. That's, I think, the third most abundant snake in Pocatello. Diurnal. They can have pretty good sized home ranges. They'll eat invertebrates and small vertebrates. They're active foragers, and they just kind of grasp their prey. Here's one eating another snake. They're preyed on by a variety of carnivores and raptors. It's not uncommon to see a racer and a raptor's tail is flying as it's flying around. One of my students studied red-tailed hawk predation on snakes in the birds of prey area. 65% of the biomass of what they were feeding the nestlings was snakes. So the red-tailed hawks were really, at least that year, it varies from year to year, the rodent populations. But in some years, the snakes are what keep those raptors going. They defend themselves by hiding. You remember the juveniles are more likely to hide. The adults are more likely to try to crawl away. And if you pick them up, they will bite you. Some of the snakes won't, but racers are more prone to biting. They're oviparous and they lay eggs. And from what I can tell, they don't have a real long lifespan, maybe about 10 years. And this is a species that appears to be secure. Now the striped whip snake is closely related to the racer. It's one of these, but this is kind of the Ferrari of Idaho snakes. Okay, they're really fast. They can get up to 6 feet long, but they're very thin. They're very slender. They have a black-brown color, and then they have those white stripes on the sides. And then again, big eyes. They're active predators out looking particularly for lizards. This is my herpetology class down, or some of my herpetology class down by the birds of prey area, and that snake there is posing. They're holding it. I'm getting the photograph there. Now these snakes used to be more widespread. They're virtually gone from Washington now, and there are not very many in eastern Idaho. They still do quite well in southwestern Idaho, but it's a snake that I think moves around a lot. It's real active, and I think it's probably affected by habitat fragmentation and roots quite a bit. Diurnal, larger home range because it's an active forager, especially feeding on lizards. And it's a grasper. It basically just grabs the prey and subdues it. Raptors prey on them. There's a red-tailed hawk down by Moab, Utah. A friend of mine took that picture and gave it to me. I think the snake is right here. And there's the red-tailed hawk with the striped whip snake. And they defend themselves by crawling. Those stripes, when they're moving, kind of make it hard to see where they are. And then and these guys are very prone to biting. They are interesting in that their males have combat. They have ritualized combat to see who gets to mate with the female, and they're egg layers too. These snakes that are real active foragers, they tend to be egg layers. The ones that are less active, like rattlesnakes, are ambush feeders. They're live feeders. So there's a real neat correlation there. These guys probably live into their teens. Globally, they're considered secure, but like I said, I think in eastern part of the range in Idaho, they're probably declining. Now, this is a snake that is a very rare snake. Gold Diller was studying a rattlesnake population up in the Clearwater Valley, and a friend and I went there in 1980. See this white material here? That's Mount St. Helens ash. Eastern Washington and northern Idaho got covered with the same ash from Mount St. Helens. But this was down along the creek, and we saw two that day. Lowell had been studying there for years and had never seen them. And we just occasionally, I had a student that was just the best person in the field, and he found this den for ringneck snakes down in southeast Idaho. And look at that. It doesn't, the southern populations don't have the ring. But they all have these beautiful yellow and red bellies. And they have this kind of defensive behavior. But they have a very spotty distribution. They're probably continually distributed, but they just are really hard to see. The place where you really find them the most is in the Clearwater, all the way from Orofino, all the way down to Lewiston is we have observations. But I think there's probably less than 100 observations for this species. Anyway, I put it in here because I think if you see one, get a picture of it. Put it in iNaturalist. No. The ones I've handled are completely, and they're mostly small too. Now back east, they can be incredibly dense, but here on the northwest, they're pretty good. This is the desert night snake. I think there's one or two observations from Blaine County, but that's not unusual. When we started doing our work on the Idaho National Laboratory, they had never been observed out there. We put 12 trapping arrays, live trapping, they're kind of phone traps, and we run those for 4 months a year. And the first year we got one. And then we ran those for about another 17, 18 years, and we get one night snake every other year. Running 12 trapping arrays with 4 months out of the year. So it's a rare species. The place where you're most likely to find them, and Lowell Diller found quite a few of them in the rim rock down around on the Snake River Canyon. It's a small snake. Usually they're, like less than 2 feet long. They have shiny scales, and they have these brown, smooth scales, and they have these brown blotches. And then they have vertically elliptical pupils. I'll show you a picture of that. There's a picture of that in the exhibit. This is the Little Lost River Valley, and we were looking for rattlesnake dens there, and I turned over a rock and I found this baby night snake. And that's the northeast edge of the range. That's the furthest northeast that species has been found. So here's just a little bit about their natural history. They're nocturnal, and usually when you see these vertically elliptical pupils, that's an indication that it's a nocturnal species. They're too small to put radio transmitters in, so and they're rare enough that you can't do recapture studies, so we basically don't know what their home range is. They probably eat invertebrates and small vertebrates. I've seen them eat like tree frogs. I think that they will eat slugs and things like that. Well, what's very interesting is that they're rear fin. Okay, they have enlarged teeth with grooves in them, and they have these modified salivary glands that the duck comes down and empties onto those fangs. And they can paralyze or kill their prey, like a lizard or a frog, something like that. It turns out that the majority of the colubrid snakes have Duvernois glands, including garter snakes. So that's a pretty widespread characteristic. They probably are fed on mostly by birds and some snakes. I think their main way of avoiding, of defending themselves is just staying hidden. But they will flatten out, and apparently they'll bluff strike. I've never seen that, but that's apparently something that they'll do. And they're egg layers. And again, don't live real long, like maybe 12 years. Okay, here's the second most common snake in Idaho and in Blaine County. And that's the gopher snake. And gopher snakes can get big. I've seen them almost 6 feet long in Idaho. And they're actually powerful snakes. They can take down rabbits, and they can take down like a prairie dog and a ground squirrel. They're constrictors. They throw coils around their prey. And they'll eat a wide variety of prey. They'll take bird eggs, they'll go hunting, up in the trees, go down in burrows looking for rodents. They have slightly keeled or ridged scales. They have a light brown color with dark blotches, and then on the tail, that becomes like rings. And then they have the stripe through the eye, and they have a round pupil. And they're generally not found at high elevations. I'd say generally not many of them get much above 6,000 feet. Here's a great place for gopher snakes, is along the Snake River and the Snake River Canyon. And this was the main snake that the red-tailed hawks were preying on. Okay, their activity is highly variable. When it's cool, they'll be out during the daytime, and then as it warms up, they'll become more crepuscular or even nocturnal. The home range is typically a couple of acres, at least in California. And I'd say their main prey is small mammals. That's what we found them primarily feeding on at the INL. And they're constrictors. And then I've already told you the story about their predation. They have a real wide range of defense, though. They're cryptically colored. They will hiss. You may have heard the name blow snake. And that comes from, this is looking into the mouth of a gopher snake. And that's the opening of the windpipe. And there's a ridge of cartilage that goes there. And when they exhale, and it vibrates that, and it acts as a mechanical amplifier. So their hissing is about 10 times louder than it would be for another snake. And then they'll flatten the head out, make their head look more, triangular, more like a rattlesnake. They'll vibrate the tail. If it's in dry leaves, it actually almost sounds like a rattle. And they'll strike. Mostly it's bluff strike. Like if you hold your hand up to it, they'll just bounce off and they'll fight. But and unfortunately, then people confuse them for rattlesnakes and kill them. And often have people bringing those in, and baby racers behave similarly. And in the springtime, when there's a lot of the babies, in the fall, when there's a lot of the babies around, people will bring them in thinking they've got rattlesnakes that they found in their garage or something. Anyway, these guys are oviparous too. They can probably live up to about 15 years. And this is a snake that seems to be doing very well. Although it's really prone to getting killed in the woods. I mean, they just get slaughtered on the woods. I mean, I've seen driving over the City of Rock, scores of them killed in the springtime when they're migrating. And one of my master's students, Denham Jacobson, studied for 2 years road mortality out on the INL. And most of these yellow dots, those are all the road kills for the gopher snakes. And then Julie Meredith was an undergraduate in our lab, and she looked at iNaturalist data and looked at all the roadkill observations, and she found that almost all of the majority of roadkill, like 60% of all the amphibians and reptiles that are killed on road in Idaho, over 60% of them are gopher snakes. But as far as we can tell, it's hard to link that up to actual impacts on populations, because there seem to be a lot of gopher snakes. We did trapping on the Orchard Combat Training Center, or site, in the Snake River Canyon area, and we had 36 trapping arrays out. And we found gopher snakes in every one of those areas. And that was in areas that had been bombed and had been razed. It was really beat up, and they seem to do pretty well with things. Okay, here's terrestrial garter snake. This is the species I did my PhD on, so I have a fond spot for them. They get up to several feet in length. They have stripes. They usually have a mid-dorsal stripe and then stripes on either side. And they typically have sort of a grayish or greenish brown color. But some of them can be quite pale and others are jet black. So there's a lot of variation. And that probably has to do with color matching the substrate they're on. That helps protect them from predators. This is right by Harriman. This is on Harriman State Park. This is the highway going by. And there's a road cut there, and this is actually a garter snake den. And you can stop there in the springtime, and you can see these snakes all sitting there in the cracks looking out. And then this is their active habitat later in the year. That's the Henry's Fork. Anyway, these guys are pretty much all over. And you can find them in real dry areas, like in southwest Idaho. You don't find them out in the desert very much. But because there used to be lakes and washes and rivers and things in parts of the desert in southeast Idaho, we still find populations of terrestrial garter snakes out at on the INL. They're a diurnal snake. They can travel quite a long ways. Up in Canada, they're known to travel one-way migrate in the spring up to 10 miles away from their overwintering site, and then 10 miles back in the fall. It's a long ways for a little snake. And they eat everything. I did some studies on what they ate. We found snails, leeches, earthworms, slugs, fish, salamanders, frogs, other snakes, including other terrestrial garter snakes, birds, bird eggs, and I even found a baby beaver tooth in one snake that it had scavenged. And they'll eat voles and deer mice and things like that. We were on a field trip for an ecology class for the University of Idaho. That's at the Arboretum there. And there's frogs in this pond on the Arboretum, and here's a terrestrial garter snake eating a frog. And they have these, they basically are graspers, they grab and overpower the prey. But they have Duvernay's glands as well. And I have found these guys in the field eating things like rodents and salamanders and one eating a lizard. And I got the prey from them and then dissected it. You can see that it's just all hemorrhaged on the side from that Duvernay's glands. And that'll kill the prey. And they get eaten by a lot of things. Their babies are quite small. They can even be taken by aquatic beetles. But fish, mammals, birds are probably the biggest predators now. And they're pretty good at hiding. They will crawl, to escape. They will bite. They will muskie, and they will poop on you too. So they have a whole range of defensive behaviors. They are live-bearing, and there's a lot of different types of reproductive mating systems in snakes. This is sort of a scramble competition. These are called mating balls. They happen in the springtime. This is a mating ball from up around Rexburg, 1st of April. Snakes coming out of hibernation. The males come out first, and they wait for the females to come out. And then you'll have many males trying to court, and mate with the female. There's a very interesting thing that occurs. The semen from the snake interacts with the fluids in the female's reproductive system, and it forms a gelatinous plug, and it's called a forced chastity. And for several days afterwards, she can't breathe with another man. But it's very common in snakes to have multiple paternity. They're usually not monogamous. And they can live into their teens. And this is, like I said, the most common snake in the state. They do really well right in town, right in cities. The common garter snake is not so common. And we think that because of there's a fungal infection disease that affected amphibians in Idaho. It seemed to have really affected northern leopard frogs the most. And they pretty much disappeared from about 80% of the state. And that seems to have had an impact on, at least that's my hypothesis, that's why our common garter snake populations are relatively low. They're not as widespread. They're more aquatic snakes, and they feed more on aquatic prey, particularly amphibians, than the terrestrial garter snakes. It doesn't show up on the slide here very well, but when you see the photograph in the library, there's bright red on the sides of bright red spots. They have very distinct yellow stripes on the back and on the sides, and a real dark brown color. And many of them have red spots, but not all of them. And then again, they're more associated with water. Let's see. So here's the a little bit about natural history. I think I've mostly hit these things. They feed heavily on amphibians, preyed on by a variety of things. Yeah, their biology is a lot like the common garter snake, except they're more tied to, or the terrestrial garter snake. These are known to live up to 20 years in captivity. But this is a species of greatest conservation need in Idaho because of the southeast, the decline in the southeast. Okay, our last species is the western rattlesnake. The subspecies that we have here is called the Great Basin rattlesnake in southern Idaho. And this is a pretty heavy-bodied snake. They get up to about a little over 3 feet in length. They generally have a light brown color with dark blotches. They have rings around the tail, and then, of course, the key defining feature is the red. And when they shed their skin, they add a segment every time they shed their skin to the rat. And those interlock and they're hollow, and when they shake the tail is, I think, the fastest contracting vertebrate muscle that's ever been measured. They can contract a couple hundred times a minute, or a second even. It's just real high frequency. And anyway, that's their most distinctive feature. They have a fairly narrow neck and then vertical pupils and a thick head, too. Oh, and the other thing they have is between the eye and the nostril, and you can see it real well right there. That's what's called the L'Oreal heat pit, and that's lined with infrared sensors. And they can detect a temperature difference of like a couple hundredths of a degree. They're very, very sensitive. In fact, they believe they actually form an image. Have any of you seen that Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, Predator? I think rattlesnakes may be able to actually, image off the long-wave thermal radiation using that. The young are generally much more brightly colored than the adults, but then they become more like that as they grow. You might, well, obviously the two rattlesnakes, the prairie rattlesnake and the western rattlesnakes, look quite a lot. But people sometimes, well, they often mistake gopher snakes for western rattlesnakes, juvenile racers, and possibly desert night snakes because they have these blotches. And so here's the rattlesnake versus the gopher snake. And the rattlesnake is heavier bodied, has the rattle, the triangular head, and the thin neck, and a duller appearance because they have the heavily ridged scales. And then there's a gopher snake. And there's a close-up of the head of the gopher snake with the round pupils, stripe. And there you can see a prairie rattlesnake head with elliptical pupils. And the heat pit is real thick. The venom glands are located right here. And they take up a good portion of the head. Okay, so this is what we think is going on with rattlesnakes in Idaho. The ones in the south are Great Basin subspecies of the western rattlesnake. And sort of west central is the northern Pacific rattlesnake. This is, I think, a hybrid from Hell's Canyon. And then here's a prairie rattlesnake from the upper salmon drainage. In 2000, these were all, 25 years ago, these were all considered the same species. Around 2000, they split this one off. I'm not very convinced of it, but that's what's the accepted nomenclature now. And the snakes are found in a pretty wide variety of habitats. This is Hell's Canyon. They go all the way from down in the base of the canyon up to, up to 6,000 feet. This is this is Rattlesnake Cave out on the Idaho National Laboratory. There's about 300 rattlesnakes that spend the winter in that talus pile. This is a collapsed lava cave. And this is one of the areas where we spent a lot of time studying the snakes. Western rattlesnakes are like the gopher snakes. Their activity time may be variable. Their home ranges can be quite large. They may travel 10 miles away from the den in high northern climes. We found them moving 5 miles away from the dens out on the INL. They feed mostly on small mammals. They're a sit and wait predator and ambush predator. They find a place and then they'll just wait there for their prey to come by. They're dangerously venomous. This is the only dangerously venomous snake that we have. They're fed on a surprising number of things will eat them. Birds kill them, like hawks, owls, badgers. We had real troubles with badgers getting into our traps and killing the rattlesnakes. Even ground squirrels can attack and kill rattlesnakes. And then some snakes, like king snakes, will kill them with rattlesnakes. And they have a whole range of defensive behaviors. I'll show you a little bit about that. They're live-bearing, typically 6 to 9 young, and they have parental care. The mothers stay with the babies for about 2 weeks after they're born until they shed their skin for the first time. And they will actively defend them. And they communally, they have what they call rookeries, where the pregnant females will go and they all hang out for like the 2 months or so that they're pregnant together. And they may take care of each other's young. I mean, that's a good thing. Okay, and I think our mark we captured, we have one that we marked in 2000, we captured in 2017, marked it as a baby. But we have others that we've, adults that we captured 15 years later. Back east, timber rattlesnakes, a friend of mine studies them there, and he's found that they live over 15 years. One of my students did this little calculation of why rattlesnake densities seem so low. You can go out in the desert, you'll have a hard time during the active season finding rattlesnake. This is his little model that he put together. Here's our den, and that den probably had about 900 snakes that lived there. There's a big crater. And with the radio telemetry studies, this is a non-pregnant female that went out, she went out several kilometers. And here's one that went out, I think, 8 kilometers, a non-pregnant female. So if you take that 900 and you figure, typically they may go out to 5 kilometers, and you buffer that den, and they could be going out in all directions. That's about 8,000 hectares. It's what, a couple acres per hectare. And so you end up with a population of, what 800 rattlesnakes, divide that, and you end up with about one snake per, what would that be, 20 football fields. So it's not surprising. By the way, they are incredibly quick. We would catch snakes, we might catch 10, 20 snakes, take them back to our lab, scale or mark them, weigh them, check their sexual condition and stuff, and then we take them back and release them. And we could dump out 20, 30 snakes on the ground, and in less than a minute you can't find any. They just disappear. We've gone up to a sagebrush where we have radio transmitters where we track the rattlesnakes, and you're standing 3 feet from them. You can hear it because when you get close, the sound of the transmitter makes a little clunking noise, and you can't see them. You know they're 3 feet away from them, and until they rattle or they move or something, you don't see them. We had one sagebrush once that we pulled 15 rattlesnakes out of that one sagebrush, and we had, until they rattled and stuff, we didn't even know they were there. They overwinter. This is Cinder Butte Den. That's Rattlesnake Cave in the wintertime. They overwinter in those communal dens. They may come from up to 8 kilometers away, and then in the summer they go back out, because if they all stayed in the den, then they wouldn't have enough food. And so they go out to forage. They're unusual for snakes. They breed away from the dens. They don't breed at the dens like most snakes do. And then the females, the pregnant females, tend to go about 1 kilometer away and then just gestate. So I want to show you a few movement patterns here. So we were doing a study for Craters of the Moon National Park, a reptile survey and study. And here we were camped at Cottonwood Creek, and this big rattlesnake came by. So we took him back to the lab, put a radio transmitter in him, and then for the next 5 months tracked him. And here's what he did. That's looking basically from the highway up into I think the Pioneer Mountains. So there's the snake. Oh, you can't see the scale bar here, but he moved several kilometers here. This is not a typical out and back movement. That is we think that's a male looking for females. And they may not eat during that time. They're out there looking to find a female to mate with. There are multiple females to mate with. And then in the fall, he went back up into this den here. This was about a 20-minute hike up there. It's a ways up there. And the picture in the photo exhibit in the library is taken from that den, looking south across the Great Rift, right down the Great Rift, and all the volcanoes in the line. So it's really fun. Now this is Javin Bowder did his master's degree looking at how topography affected rattlesnake movements. Most rattlesnake studies have been done in relatively low topography areas. He was in the Frank Church, which is a very, very, mountainous area. So here's a prairie rattlesnake. I think telemetered 40 rattlesnakes over a 3-year period. This was the most physically demanding study I've ever seen. He was hiking, I think, 12 miles a day, changing elevation over 10,000 feet. He lost about 15 pounds during his field season. And I don't think many people could have actually done that study. Here's the Taylor Ranch Research Station on Big Creek. That's a tributary of the Middle Fork of the Salmon. And back in the 1990s, we tracked snakes with radio transmitters back to this den area. And we found another den area here too. And we thought that this is what the snakes did. So here's a snake. This is the annual migration route mapped out from a telemetered snake. So this snake comes down from the den, comes comes down the hillside to this pasture, crosses the river back and forth 6 times during the year, and then in the fall comes back to the den. And that's what we thought these snakes were doing. They were down doing that. The different snakes did different things. And that's what's the beauty of telemetry, is you find the snakes where they go, not just where you look for them. So now here's a male that starts out. This is a big male. He starts out, apparently he overwintered by himself, and he goes up and down Big Creek all summer long. And from every 2 to 3 days, Javin would relocate these snakes. And if they've eaten something, you usually can see a bulge. Apparently that snake didn't eat at all that summer. He was just looking for food. But he just goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth up there. Now here's another one. So these animals do different things. So here's one. I think this was a female. And she takes off, and she leaves that sub-basin, goes over the ridge, and into the adjoining sub-basin. A wildfire came through in the first year of the study and killed 2 of the snakes over there on that side. And there she's coming back in the fall. But the most exciting one is this last one I'll show you. And that was, there's a small congregation of snakes over here on this point. And this snake went up, I think it changed its elevation about 2,000 feet. It went up. And who would have thought that that's what they did? People ask me, how high did they get? Well, yeah, what time of year? This snake, when it was moved away from the den, had gone up to 2,000 feet. It also appears that this is not a random kind of movement, that these animals are spacing themselves out. I've just about used up all my time, so I'm going to skip over these studies. The one thing I wanted to mention to you a little bit, that people usually are pretty interested in, is snake bite. And I've got about an hour-long talk on this, so I'll try to boil this down to 2 or 3 minutes. But the only dangerously venomous snake in Idaho are the western rattlesnake and the prairie rattlesnake. And you do not want to be bitten by a rattlesnake. It can cause tissue, death, paralysis of like a finger or something. And it's very painful, can make you quite sick, but it's not lethal. To my knowledge, from what I've been able to find, no adult who's ever died from a rattlesnake bite. There's a record, the only record of a fatality that I found is an 11-year-old girl on the Oregon Trail back in the 1800s who died from a snake bite. The risk of snake bite, nationwide, there's about 15,000 snake bites a year. Most of those are not accidents, with people messing around with snakes. So we could cut the snake bite issue the majority of them out by just people leaving it alone. So people, what should you do to avoid being bitten? Leave snakes alone. That's really it. There's so many times where people are trying to move a snake, or they're, or they're handling it. There's what they call the 3 T's of snake bite: testosterone, tequila, and tattoos. Yeah, it's young men inebriated that are the most often bit. It used to be most bites were on the lower extremity. Now most bites are on the hand. It's because people mess with it. I have never been bitten, and I take great pride in that. I have handled a lot of venomous snakes, and I was often made fun of because I was so careful. But I actually attribute, at least working with the snakes in Idaho, they're not very likely to bite you. I think I can count on 2 hands the number of what I would say an unprovoked strike. If you touch them or step on them, then you can expect that they'll try to bite you. But they generally are pretty. I take my class out to a big snake den on the desert, and they're always surprised. The snakes are just trying to get away. They're just going down. They do not come after you. The risk of snake bite is really pretty low. It turns out too that maybe about a third of all rattlesnake bites are what we call dry bites, and so they don't inject any poison, so basically nothing's going to happen. The flip side of that is you can do anything and it looks like it's effective. So that's really made, unless you have controlled studies, it's hard to say what works and what doesn't work in treating snakes. So you avoid being bitten by leaving them alone. Listen for rattlesnakes. They don't always rattle, but they often do. That's usually when I would detect them. Watch where you step, and those are the main things you can do to avoid being bitten. Most snake bites occur within 5 miles of home. Yeah, usually people get bitten where they live. The consequences of snake bite, like I said, it would be really an odd thing for someone to die from a rattlesnake bite in Idaho, but it's very painful, and it's also expensive to treat, so you do not want to be bitten. So my advice is to leave snakes alone. And I will not take my advice on rattlesnake leave. But what should you do if bitten? There's basically no effective first aid. Okay, what you've heard about with tourniquets and extractors and putting ice on it and electric shocks, none of that is accepted anymore. The best snake bite kit is car keys and a cell phone. Call a emergency facility. Let them know you've been bitten. Check and make sure they have antivenin. You don't want to drive 50 miles or something and find out they don't. I believe where I live, they're at the emergency rooms at Ermac, down in Bingham County, and Portland Medical Center. They all have antivenin. And that's the treatment. They'll watch and see if you show the symptoms of envenomation, and if you do, they'll inject like 6 to 10 vials of antivenom. And that basically neutralizes the poison, binds to the venom, and neutralizes it. And we could talk a lot about that, but so this is from a group called the National Snake Bite Report Group. Stay calm. Good luck. Call 911 and to be evaluated. Let people know you're coming. You should try to have someone else drive you. And try to, you don't want to exert yourself too much and spread the venom around too much. Take off, if you've got like a ring on or real constricting clothing, take that off, because the main thing that will be happening with the bit is it's going to swell. And then, now this is new. This is something you may not have heard. I didn't hear this until about a year and a half ago. They used to tell us to keep the bite at heart level or below. Now the opposite. You're supposed to keep it at a 45-degree angle. And the idea mainly is it's not systemic effects from the bite. The real danger with most of these rattlesnake bites is it's going to cause localized tissue death. And apparently keeping it elevated reduces the swelling and decreases the damage to the tissues. But they're very emphatic about that now. And they get to the emergency room. The sooner the better, when they say timeless tissue, but you can go a day later and it still can be very helpful. But there's a lot of things that you don't do. Okay, now here's something that I'm not a physician, but this is we invited the head of emergency medicine from Stanford Medical Center, Emergency Center, to come up and talk to us about this. And he said that there's a real danger that your physician will have never treated a snake bite. They just won't know about it. And that the treatments are, things are changing over time. So what he recommended, and he said he carries this phone number in his wallet. And if you get bit, request that your doctor call one of these poison control centers, and they have the most up-to-date stuff. And it's complicated treating these bites. There's a lot going on. There's different types of humanity now, and the treatments are still in development. One thing that I found incredibly helpful, this has been the best source of information I've found, is what's called the National Snakebite Support Facebook page. And you can't comment on there, but if you have a bite, you can come in, and they will, some of the best experts in the whole country are in this group. And they also have veterinarians that will help if you don't. And the amount of misinformation about treating dogs is huge. They tell people to use, antibiotics, and I can't remember the other thing right now that's commonly used. It's an antihistamine. And these things, if anything, they make things worse. And so you really want to be careful that your vet is, if they haven't been recently trained, that they've been done. And I'm much more worried about my dog being bitten than I am me being bitten. My dogs aren't very smart about that. They'll run right up. But the other night we were hiking. We had our group of dogs, and they all had that gopher snake cornered. And that snake was coiled up and hissing and striking. And one of our dogs was running into it, and I ended up taking the gopher snake and putting it up in a juniper so he couldn't get to it. But if that had been a rattlesnake, one of them might have been bitten. And the fatality rate is pretty low. I think in Idaho it's estimated to be less than 1%. But still, dogs do die, and they can get really sick. Okay, I think I'm done. I mean, I'm not done with going, but I think I should stop. I will have this PDF, and anyone that wants to contact me, you can email me at charlespeterson@isu.edu, and I'm happy to send you a PDF of this, and you can look at the stuff that I didn't get to. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chuck. If I could ask, I know some of you are going to need to go, and there may be questions, and there's a snake, but before you go, I would appreciate it if you would fill out the survey that was on your chair. It always helps. I read every single one of them. We ask for your suggestions about topics or speakers, and that would just be a wonderful thing. So. Do we have some questions, or should we go straight to a live snake?
There's lots of questions, so we'll do that. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, the question was, after snakes migrated, how does it know to get back? Apparently, I think that probably the biggest thing is chemosensation. They actually are laying down pheromone trails and chemical trails. But they may be able to use celestial cues, and they also can sense geomagnetism. And so they have and some of these snakes can be displaced pretty long distances. So they don't have chemical cues, and they can still get back. So I think that this navigation thing is a really interesting thing. And one of my colleagues studied this in timber rattlesnakes, and he found that the baby snakes didn't all go back. Some went one way, some went another way. Some apparently chemical trailed the females back to the den, but others seemed to take off and go the other way. And what cues they're using, I don't know. But there could be things like geomagnetism. My impression, and this is just kind of speculation based on some observations, is that I mean, there are these snakes that are all out there. I mean, there's hundreds of snakes out there, and these guys have to find their place in that community of snakes. And that once they find it, within that first year or two, then that's their route. And then year after year after year, they follow that route. I mean, we've got snakes telemetered for multiple years, and they follow that trail year after year after year. It's like they get a bearing, and then they may go different distances away, but they go out at the same bearing. Yeah. Yeah. They're scat. Well, you know, reptiles don't pee. They're like birds. You know, that white that you see with bird poop. That's actually the uric acid crystals. So that's their equivalent of pee. That is just kind of solid or semi-solid. And then the feces are whatever they've been eating. So they can't digest hair. They can't digest feathers. They do digest bones. They can't digest scales. So we would collect rattlesnake scat, and that's what we would use to do the diet analysis. So, and I have not studied that very much, but one of my friends who's an animal tracker, I mean, he actually includes that in his animal tracking book. You know, this is what rattlesnakes, or this is what snake scat looks like. So you can. Yeah, oh yeah, you can. Yeah, that's true. That would be the uric acid, and that'll persist. You know, because a lot of times you see that white material, you know, it's on rocks, and that's the uric acid that comes from things like pack rats and stuff. Yeah. Okay, so but I'm happy to stay around and answer more questions later if people want. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, Charles Peterson, not Charles Peterson. Well, I suggest that everybody stay there until I get the snake in the tube, okay? I not only suggest it, I demand it. Okay? So I'm going to take the snake out. Interestingly, snakes will balance. If I could have everybody's attention, please. If we're going to do this, I'd like everybody paying attention. Snakes will balance on a hook. So I'll hook this snake up. This is a snake that was born in our lab 7 years ago. A female that we had collected out on the desert. But I'll hook him, I think it's a male, I'll hook him, I'll put him in that container, and then I'll try to slip the tube over his head. And then once I can get a hold of him and he's safely in the tube, then if somebody wants to come up and, you know, feel the texture of the skin or touch the rattle, that's okay. If you do that, though, I suggest that after you get done touching the snake, either wash your hands in the restroom or you use that hand cleaner. Just you know, we named it, this one is number 3. There were 6. The mother was, we called her Ludi. What I would do is take the names from the scientific names. So our toad was Anopceros boreas, so it's Boris the toad. And the rattlesnake was Ludi, after lutosis. By the way, they don't want this. They want to just be left alone. So, but this is what the snake has to do every month in order to get it, make its living. Yeah. Now I practiced this before and it worked, but sometimes they just won't get in the tube, so hopefully it'll do that.